Ah, well, hello, Windsards of the Winds Lodge. Apprentice Tim here, also known as McEnroe, or I've gone by McEnroe in the past. My real name is Tim. Some do call me Tim. And I'm still running for prefect for the upcoming term. And thank you, Prefect Skywalker, for your service to the Winds Lodge. You were prefect when I first enrolled in Gray School a few years ago, and it's been a pleasure getting to have you serve in that capacity a few times while I've been an apprentice here at the Gray School. The term is almost over, and as such, we're about to begin a new term. And one of the things I would like to do this term is share stories with you that I find informative, enjoyable, and just plain fun to listen to. And as you can see, I've got a whole pile of different stories from around the world. And I just found one that I think could be a good one to share with you. It's called The Wind Tells About Waldamaar Daa and his daughters. This Hans Christian Andersen tale. And they lie about the page that it's on. No, I just can't read. I just can't read. Here I am. I'm going to read to you, and I can't read. So, this is the complete illustrated works of Hans Christian Andersen. The publisher's name, the press, has been covered up. Chancellor Press. Published in Great Britain in 1889. This particular volume was first published in 1983 by Chancellor Press. This current edition was published in 1994. The story, The Wind Tells About Waldamaar Daa and His Daughters. It's on page 293. If any of you are able to find a particular copy of this and you would like to read yourselves, thrift stores are great stores for good stories, for good books, old books. So, make yourself comfortable for a minute or two. It's not an overtly long tale. A few pages, 5 or 6 pages. The Wind Tells About Waldamaar Daa and His Daughters. And I chose this story because it's about the wind. And we are the Winds Lodge, are we not? The Four Winds, the Society of the Four Winds. So all these different stories that after you vote me in as prefect, that I will read to you, I don't know, once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, I'll upload a video, 10, anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes long to YouTube. You guys are welcome to check it out. Stories pertaining to the element of wind and air and its associated correspondences. So, The Wind Tells About Waldamaar Daa and His Daughters. When the wind sweeps across the grass, the field has a ripple like a pond, and when it sweeps across the corn, the field waves to and fro like a high sea. That is called the wind's dance. But the wind does not dance only, he also tells stories, and how loudly he can sing out of his deep chest, and how different it sounds in the treetops in the forest, and through the loopholes and clefts and cracks in walls. Do you see how the wind drives the clouds up yonder like a frightened flock of sheep? Do you hear how the wind howls down here through the open valley, like a watchman blowing his horn? With wonderful tones he whistles and screams down the chimney and into the fireplace. The fire crackles and flares up and shines far into the room, and the little place is warm and snug, and it is pleasant to sit there listening to the sounds. Let the wind speak, for he knows plenty of stories and fairy tales, many more than any known to than are known to any of us. Just hear what the wind can tell. Huh, hush, roar along. That is the burden of the song. By the shores of the great belt, one of the straits that unite the Kattegat with the Baltic, lies an old mansion with thick red walls, says the wind. I know every stone in it. I saw it when it still belonged to the castle of Marsk Steg on the promontory. But it had to be pulled down, and the stone was used again for the walls of a new mansion in another place, the baronial mansion of Borreby, which still stands by the coast. I knew them, the noble lords and ladies, the changing races that dwelt there, and now I'm going to tell about Waldamaar Daa and his daughters. How proudly he carried himself. He was of royal blood. He could do more than merely hunt the stag and empty the wine cask. It shall be done, he was accustomed to say. His wife walked proudly in gold embroidered garments over the polished marble floors. The tapestries were gorgeous, the furniture was expensive and artistically carved. She brought gold and silver plate with her into the house, and there was German beer in the cellar. Black fiery horses neighed in the stables. There was a wealthy look about the house of Borreby at the time when wealth was still at home there. 4 children dwelt there also, 3 delicate maidens, Ida, Joanna, and Anna Dorothea. I have never forgotten their names. They were rich people, noble people, born in affluence, nurtured in affluence. Hush, roar along, sang the wind, and then he continued. I did not see here, as in other great noble houses, the high-born lady sitting among her women, in the great hall turning the spinning wheel. Here she swept the sounding chords of the cithern and sang to the sound, but not always old Danish melodies, but songs of a strange land. It was live and let live here. Stranger guests came from far and near. The music sounded, the goblets clashed, and I was not able to drown the noise, said the wind. Ostentation and haughtiness and splendor and display and rule were there. But the fear of the Lord was not there. And it was just on the evening of the first day of May, the wind continued, I came from the west and had seen how the ships were being crushed by the waves, with all on board and flung on the west coast of Jutland. I had hurried across the heath and over Jutland's wood-girt eastern coast and over the island of Fuinen. And now I drove over the great belt, groaning and sighing. Then I lay down to rest on the shore of Sealand, in the neighborhood of the great house of Borreby. When the forest, the splendid oak forest, still rose, the young men servants of the neighborhood were collecting branches and brushwood under the oak trees. The largest and driest they could find they carried into the village, and piled them up in a heap and set them on fire. And men and maidens singing in a circle round the blazing pile. I lay quiet, quite quiet, continued the wind, but I silently touched a branch, which had been brought by the handsomest of the men servants, and the wood blazed up brightly, blazed up higher than all the rest. And now he was the chosen one, and bore the name of Street Goat, and might choose his street lamb first from among the maids. and there was mirth and rejoicing greater than I had ever heard before in the halls of the rich baronial mansion. And the noble lady drove towards the baronial mansion with her 3 daughters in a gilded carriage drawn by 6 horses. The daughters were young and fair, 3 charming blossoms, rose and lily and pale hyacinth. The mother was a proud tulip, and never acknowledged the salutation of one of the manor maids who paused in their sport to do her honor. The gracious lady seemed a flower that was rather stiff in the stalk. Rose, lily, and pale hyacinth. Yes, I saw them all 3. Whose lambkins will they one day become, I thought. Their street goat will be a gallant knight, perhaps a prince. Hush! Hurry along, hurry along. Yes, the carriage rolled on with them, and the peasant people resumed their dancing. They rode that summer through all the villages round about. But in the night when I rose again, said the wind, there the very noble lady was down to rise again no more. That thing came upon her which comes upon all. There is nothing new in that. Waldamaar Daa stood for a space silent and thoughtful. The proudest tree can be bowed without being broken, said a voice within him. His daughters wept, and all the people in the mansion wiped their eyes, but Lady Daw had driven away, and I drove away too, and rushed along. Hush! Said the wind. I returned again. I often returned, again over the island of Fuenen and the shores of the Belt, and I sat down by Borreby, by the splendid oak wood. There the heron made his nest, and wood pigeons haunted the place, and blue ravens, and even the black stork. It was still spring. Some of them were yet sitting on their eggs. Others had already hatched their young. But how they flew up, how they cried! The axe sounded blow upon blow. The wood was to be felled. Waldamaar Daa wanted to build a noble ship, a man of war, a 3-decker which the king would be sure to buy. And therefore the wood must be felled, the landmark of the seamen, the refuge of the birds. The hawk startled up and flew away, for its nest was destroyed. The heron and all the birds of the forest became homeless, and flew about in fear and in anger. I could well understand how they felt. Crows and ravens croaked aloud as if in scorn. Crack, crack, the nest cracks, cracks, cracks. Far in the interior of the wood, where the noisy swarm of laborers were working, stood Waldamaar Daa and his 3 daughters, and all laughed at the wild cries of the birds. Only one, the youngest, Anna Dorothea, felt grieved in her heart, and when they made preparations to fell a tree that was almost dead, and on whose naked branches the black stork had built his nest, whence the little storks were stretching out their heads, she begged for mercy for the little things, and tears came into her eyes. Therefore the tree with the black stork's nest was left standing. The tree was not worth speaking of. There was a great hewing and sawing, and a 3-decker was built. The architect was of low origin, but of great pride, and his eyes and forehead told how clever he was. And Waldamaar Daa was fond of listening to him, and so was Waldamaar Daa's daughter Ida, the eldest, who was now 15 years old. And while he built the ship for the father, he was building for himself an airy castle into which he and Ida were to go as a married couple, which might indeed have happened if the castle with stone walls and ramparts and moats had remained. But in spite of his wise head, the architect remained but a poor bird. And indeed, what business has a sparrow to take part in a dance of peacocks? Hush! I careered away, and he careered away too, for he was not allowed to stay, and little Ida very soon got over it, because she was obliged to get over it. The proud black horses were neighing in the stable. They were worth looking at, and accordingly they were looked at. The admiral, who had been sent by the king himself to inspect the new ship and to take measures for its purchase, spoke loudly in admiration of the beautiful horses. I heard all that, said the wind. I accompanied the gentleman through the open door, and strew blades of straw like bars of gold before their feet. Waldamaar Daa wanted to have gold, and the admiral wished for the proud black horses, and that is why he praised them so much. But the hint was not taken, and consequently the ship was not bought. It remained on the shore, covered over with boards. as Noah's Ark that never got to the water. Hush, rush away, away, and that was a pity. In the winter, when the fields were covered with snow and the water with large blocks of ice, that I blew up on the coast, continued the wind. Crows and ravens came all as black as might be, great flocks of them, and alighted on the dead, deserted, lonely ship by the shore, and croaked in hoarse accents of the wood that was no more, of the many pretty birds' nests destroyed, and the little ones left without a home, and all for the sake of that great bit of lumber, that proud ship that never sailed forth. I made the snowflakes whirl, and the snow lay like a great lake high around the ship and drifted over it. I let it hear my voice, that it might know what a storm has to say. Certainly I did my part towards teaching it seamanship. Hush, push along. And the winter passed away. Winter and summer both passed away, and they are still passing away, even as I pass away, as the snow whirls along and the apple blossom whirls along and the leaves fall away, 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 and men are passing away too. But the daughters were still young, and little Ida was a rose, as fair to look upon as on the day when the architect saw her. I often seized her long brown hair when she stood in the garden by the apple tree, mussing and not heeding how I strewed blossoms on her hair, and loosened it while she was gazing at the red sun and the golden sky, through the dark underwood and the trees of the garden. Her sister was bright and slender as a lily. Joanna had height and deportment, but was like her mother, rather stiff in the stalk. She was very fond of walking through the great hall where hung the portraits of her ancestors. The women were painted in dresses of silk and velvet with a tiny little hat, embroidered with pearls on their plaited hair. They were handsome women. The gentlemen were represented clad in steel or in costly cloaks lined with squirrel skin. They wore little ruffs and swords at their sides, but not buckled to their hips. Where would Joanna's picture find his place on that wall some day? And how would he look, her noble lord and husband? This is what she thought of, and of this she spoke softly to herself. I heard it as I swept into the long hall and turned round to come out again. Anna Dorothea, the pale hyacinth, the child of 14, was quiet and thoughtful. Her great deep blue eyes had a musing look, but the childlike smile still played around her lips. I was not able to blow it away, nor did I wish to do so. We met in the garden, in the hollow lane, in the field and meadow. She gathered herbs and flowers which she knew would be useful to her father in concocting the drinks and drops he distilled. Waldamaar Daa was arrogant and proud, but he was also a learned man and knew a great deal. That was no secret, and many opinions were expressed concerning it. In his chimney there was a fire, even in summertime. He would lock the door of his room, and for days the fire would be poked and raked, but of this he did not talk much. The forces of nature must be conquered in silence, and soon he would discover the art of making the best thing of all, the red gold. That is why the chimney was always smoking, therefore the flames crackled so frequently. Yes, I was there too, said the wind. Let it go, I sang down through the chimney. It will end in smoke, air, coals, and ashes. You will burn yourself. Hush! Drive away. Drive away. But Waldamaar Daa did not drive it away. The splendid black horses in the stable, what became of them? What became of the old gold and silver vessels and cupboards and chests, the cows in the fields, and the house and home itself? Yes, they may melt away, may melt in the golden crucible, and yet yield no gold. Empty grew the barns and storerooms, the cellars and magazines. The servants decreased in number, and the mice multiplied. Then a window broke, and then another, and I could get in elsewhere besides. At the door, said the wind. Where the chimney smokes, the meal is being cooked, the proverb says. But here the chimney smoked that devoured all the meals for the sake of the red gold. I blew through the courtyard gate like a watchman blowing his horn. The wind went on, but no watchman was there. I twirled the weathercock round on the summit of the tower, and it creaked like the snoring of the water. But no water was there. Only mice and rats were there. Poverty laid the tablecloth. Poverty sat in the wardrobe and in the larder. The door fell off its hinges, cracks and fissures made their appearance, and I went in and out at pleasure, and that is how I know all about it. Amid smoke and ashes, amid sorrow and sleepless nights, the hair and beard of the master turned gray, and deep furrows showed themselves round his temples. His skin turned pale and yellow as his eyes looked greedily for the gold, the desired gold. I blew the smoke and ashes into his face and beard. The result of his labor was debt instead of pelf. I sung through the burst window panes and the yawning clefts in the walls. I blew into the chests of drawers belonging to the daughters wherein lay clothes that had become faded and threadbare from being worn over and over and over again. That was not the song that had been sung at the children's cradle. The lordly life had changed to a life of penury. I was the only one who rejoiced aloud in the castle, and said the wind. I snowed them up, and they say snow keeps people warm. They had no wood, and the forest from which they might have brought it was cut down. It was a biting frost. I rushed in through the loopholes and passages, over gables and roofs, that I might be brisk. They were lying in bed because of the cold. The three high-born daughters and their father were crouching under the leathern coverlets. Nothing to bite, nothing to break, no fire on the hearth. That was a life for high-born people. Hush, let it go. But that is what my Lord Daa could not do. He could not let it go. After winter comes spring, he said. After want, good times will come. One must not lose patience. One must learn to wait. Now my house and lands are mortgaged. It is indeed high time, and the gold will soon come at Easter. I heard how he spoke thus, looking at a spider's web. Thou cunning little weaver, thou dost teach me perseverance. Let them tear thy web, and thou wilt begin it again, and complete it. Let them destroy it again, and I will resolutely begin to work again, again. That is what we must do, and that will repay itself at last. It was the morning of Easter Day. The bells sounded from the neighboring church, and the sun seemed to rejoice in the sky. The master had watched through the night in feverish excitement, and had been melting and cooling, distilling and mixing. I heard him sighing like a soul in despair. I heard him praying, and I noticed how he held his breath. The lamp was burned out, but he did not notice it. I blew at the fire of coals, and it threw its red glow upon his ghastly white face, lighting it up with a glare, and his sunken eyes looked forth wildly out of their deep sockets, but they became larger and larger as though they would burst. Look at the alchemic glass. It glows in the crucible red hot and pure and heavy. He lifted it with a trembling hand and cried with a trembling voice, Gold, gold. He was quite dizzy. I could have blown him down, said the wind, but I only fanned the glowing coals and accompanied him through the door to where his daughter sat shivering. His coat was powdered with ashes, and there were ashes in his beard and in his tangled hair. He stood straight up and held his costly treasure on high in the brittle glass. Found! Found! Gold! Gold! He shouted, and again he held aloft the glass to let it flash in the sunshine, but his hand trembled, and the alchemic glass fell, clattering to the ground, and broke into 1,000 pieces, and the last bubble of his happiness had burst. Hush! Rushing away. And I rushed away from the gold-maker's house. Late in autumn, when the days are short, and the mist comes and strews cold drops upon the berries and leafless branches, I came back in fresh spirits, rushed through the air, swept the sky clear, and snapped the dry twigs, which is certainly no great labor, but yet it must be done. Then there was another kind of sweeping clean at Waldamaar Da's in the mansion of Borreby. His enemy, O Raniel of Vashnas, was there with the mortgage of the house and everything it contained in his pocket. I drummed against the broken window panes, beat against the old rotten doors, and whistled through the cracks and rifts. Hush! Mr. Al Raniel did not like staying there. Ida and Anna Dorothea wept bitterly. Joanna stood pale and proud and bit her thumb till it bled. But what could that avail? Al Raniel offered to allow Waldamaar Daa to remain in the mansion till the end of his life, but no thanks were given him for his offer. I listened to hear what occurred. I saw the ruined gentleman lift his head and throw it back prouder than ever, and I rushed against the house and the old lime trees with such force that one of the thickest branches broke, one that was not decayed, and the branch remained lying at the entrance as a broom when anyone wanted to sweep the place out. And a grand sweeping out there was. I thought it would be so. It was hard on that day to preserve one's composure, but their will was as hard as their fortune. There was nothing they could call their own except the clothes they wore. Yes, there was one thing more, the alchemist's glass, a new one that had lately been bought and filled with what had been gathered up from the ground of the treasure which promised so much, but never kept its promise. Waldamaar Daa hid the glass in his bosom, and taking his stick in his hand, the once rich gentleman passed with his daughters out of the house of Borreby. I blew cold upon his heated cheeks, I stroked his grey beard and his long white hair, and I sang as well as I could. Hush! Gone away, and that was the end of the wealth and splendor. Ida walked on one side of the old man, and Anna Dorothea on the other. Joanna turned round at the entrance. Why? Fortune would not turn because she did so. She looked at the old walls of what had once been the castle of Marsksteg, and perhaps she thought it of his daughters. The eldest gave the youngest her hand, and forth they went to the far-off land. Was she thinking of this old song? Here were three of them, and their father was with them too. They walked along the road on which they had once driven in their splendid carriage. They walked forth as beggars with their father, and wandered out into the open field, into a mud hut, which they rented for $1.50 a year, into their new house with the empty rooms and empty vessels. Crows and magpies fluttered above them and cried as if in contempt, "Craw, craw!" out of the nest, "Craw, craw!" as they had done in the wood at Borreby when the trees were felled. Daa and his daughters could not help hearing it. I blew about their ears, for what use would it be that they should listen? And they went to live in the mud hut on the open field, and I wandered away over moor and field through the bare brushes and leafless forest to the open waters, the free shores, to other lands, hush, hush away, year after year. And how did Waldamaar Daa and his daughters prosper? The wind tell us. The one I saw last, yes, for the last time, was Anna Dorothea, the pale hyacinth. Then she was old and bent, for it was 50 years afterwards. She lived longer than the rest, she knew all. Yonder on the heath by the Jutland town of Woburg stood the fine new house of the cannon, built of red bricks with projecting gables. The smoke came up thickly from the chimney. The cannon's gentle lady and her beautiful daughter sat in the bay window and looked over the hawthorn hedge and the garden towards the brown heath. What were they looking at? Their glances rested upon the stork's nest without, and on the hut, which was almost falling in. The roof consisted of moss and house leek. In so far as a roof existed there at all, the stork's nest covered the greater part of it, and that alone was in proper condition, for it was kept in order by the stork himself. That is a house to be looked at, but not to be touched. I must deal gently with it, said the wind. For the sake of the stork's nests, the hut had been allowed to stand, though it was a blot upon the landscape. They did not like to drive the stork away. Therefore the old shed was left standing, and the poor woman who dwelt in it was allowed to stay. She had the Egyptian bird to thank for that. Or was it perchance her reward because she had once interceded for the nest of its black brother in the forest of Borreby? At the time she was the poor woman was a young child, a pale hyacinth in the rich garden. She remembered all that right well, did Anna Dorothea. Oh, yes, people can sigh like the wind moaning in the rushes and reeds. Oh, she sighed. No bells sounded at thy burial, Waldamaar Daa. The poor schoolboys did not even sing a psalm when the former lord of Borreby was laid in the earth to rest. Oh, everything has an end, even misery. Sister Ida became the wife of a peasant. That was the hardest trial that befell our father, that the husband of a daughter of his should be a miserable serf, whom the proprietor could mount on the wooden horse for punishment. I suppose he is under the ground now. And thou, Ida, alas, alas, it is not ended yet, wretch that I am. Grant me that I may die, kind heaven. That was Anna Dorothea's prayer in the wretched hut which was left standing for the sake of the stork. I took pity on the fairest of the sisters, said the wind. Her courage was like that of a man, and in a man's clothes she took service as a sailor on board of a ship. She was sparring of words and of a dark countenance, but willing at her work. But she did not know how to climb, so I blew her overboard before anybody found out that she was a woman, and according to my thinking, that was well done, said the wind. On such an Easter morning as that on which Waldamaar Daa had fancied that he had found the red gold, I heard the tones of a psalm under the stork's nest, among the crumbling walls. It was Anna Dorothea's last song. There was no window, only a hole in the wall. The sun rose up like a mass of gold, and looking through, what a splendor he diffused. Her eyes and her heart were breaking, but that they would have done, even if the sun had not shone that morning on Anna Dorothea. The stork covered her hut till her death. I sang at her grave, said the wind. I sang at her father's grave. I know where his grave is and where hers is, and nobody else knows it. New times, changed times. The old high road now runs through cultivated fields. The new road winds among the trim ditches, and soon the railway will come with its train of carriages and rush over the graves which are forgotten like the names. Hush, passed away, passed away. That is the story of Waldamaar Daa and his daughters. Tell it better, any of you, if you know how, said the wind, and turned away, and he was gone. Well, the red gold for you alchemists. And so that is the story of Waldamaar Daa and his daughters as told by the wind. Thank you for joining me, and until next time.